Whole internet, every part. Okay, we are on chapter 2. We're finishing, God willing, tonight, chapter 2, with the help of Hashem and all of you. We are finishing tonight chapter 2 of Mitzvos Hamanos Alakus. We're going to start chapter 3. We've been talking in chapter 2 about the difference between faith and knowledge, and really tonight's just what remains of chapter 2 tonight is just a summing up, and then we'll have the English summary at the end, which will be nice, and really sum up what we learned in this chapter. Okay. So, from everything that we've learned about the difference, this is really what we've been talking about for weeks now, the difference between faith in God and knowledge of God. So, from all of that, we can understand the very beginning of our mimer. If you'll remember, at the very beginning, we explained that there's many different opinions among the different rabbis as to whether it is one of the 613 commandments, or whether it's one of the 613 mitzvahs to have faith in God or not. Right? And the question is never whether it's important to have faith in God. The question is it one of the 613 mitzvahs, right? And in the process of our discussion, we found out that really it's more complicated because there's two separate things which some rabbis count as one thing. And the two separate things is knowledge of God and faith of God. Some rabbis say that both of these are mitzvah. And one rabbi, the Bahag, who was so to speak, the troublemaker of our original list, says that neither of these is a mitzvah. Most rabbis say that both of them are a mitzvah. The Bahag, the Baal Halachas Gedolos, says that neither is a mitzvah. And from what we've learned from about faith and knowledge, we're now going to summarize why this is the case. What they mean when they say either they are mitzvahs or they're not mitzvahs. Va'ata yisbar das monei mitzvahs, on page 53 in the English. Now we will understand, we can explain the opinion of the counters of the mitzvahs, the ones who counted which commandments of the Torah are the 613. Shenechlaku b'zeh, which, as we know, they have a disagreement. Im yimna zeh b'minyan ha-mitzvahs le'lav. Im lav, whether we count to know the commandment to know God as one of the 613 commandments or not. V'das Bahag, the opinion of the Baal Halachas Gedolos was shalafi she'ikar inyan zeh yedias alakus hu musak v'nirgesh kanal. Since this fundamental principle of knowing God is grasped and felt, as we've explained before, right? As we explained last week, the whole idea of das is a knowledge which brings to feeling. It is an intimate knowledge and a deep, so to speak, a deeper knowledge, and not just knowing intellectually, but to know to the level of feeling is really what we mean when we say das. And if that's what das is, then how can you have a commandment on this? Really, this idea has also been mentioned before in our mimer, but now we're reiterating it all in one place. Good evening. If knowledge of God, if what knowledge of God means is right, we know what it doesn't mean. It does not mean reaching the deep understanding and intimate knowledge of God himself, which, as we explained last week, is not possible, right? As we've been explaining, is not possible. It is not possible to have a deep, intimate understanding that you can feel in your heart, an intimate knowledge of what God is. All that it's possible to have a deep knowledge of is that God is. You can have knowledge of that he is, but not of what he is, as we've been explaining. But that which we are commanded to know, right? And since that's all that we can know, that must be what the commandment is to know. We are commanded or not commanded, really, this is the issue at question, right? Whether or not we are commanded to know that God is, and what, and all the things that this idea entails, the idea samitzias, the knowledge that God is, and everything that entails. The Bahag says this is not a mitzvah. Why? Because a commandment only falls upon that which is a matter of choice, right? And more. Rambam Perek Beis Min HaShmona Prakim, as the Rambam writes in the second chapter of the Shmona Prakim. Im b'deis ebe machshava b'dibur lachshav le'lachshav l'daber le'ledaber lasos le'lasos. And so, in what are we commanded? We're commanded either to think or not to think, to speak or not to speak, or to do or not to do, right? In other words, thought, speech, and action, these are the three realms, these are the three areas, the Bahag would say, that you can be commanded on. But something which you feel and which is obvious to the eye, how can there be a commandment about, right? For example, I command you to know that you are alive, right? This is the example we've been using, that you can know that God exists the way that by looking at a person, you can know that there is a soul in the person, right? So can there be a commandment to you? I command you to know that you are alive right now. Right? The question is, how can this even be a commandment? The Bahag would say that this isn't something you can be commanded about, right? A commandment is either to think or to speak or to do something. But this is not something which falls in any of those categories. This is a knowledge. It comes even before thinking, right? This is a profound knowledge. This is something you know intimately as you know yourself, right? It's like I can't command you to believe that you exist. I can't command you to know that you're alive right now. This isn't something which is to be commanded. This is something which precedes any command, right? This is something which is fundamental, right? So the Bahag, the Baal Halachos Gedolos, argues that just that the knowledge of God is the same way, that you can know so deeply and so profoundly, and a person in the right frame of mind can have it's so obvious to a person who thinks correctly that there is a God, that there is a creator, that there's no it's not possible to have a commandment on this. You can't command someone to think something which is patently obvious. Right? And the Bahag says, and as we've been explaining, the knowledge of God, or the knowledge that God exists in the conception of Judaism is patently obvious. In other words, there's no right, this is going to be that'll be the people that disagree. Okay, so suffice it to say, something which is patently obvious, like which the Bahag would say is like the fact that you have a soul that makes you alive, or the fact that there is a God. On this, you cannot be commanded. This is something which precedes all commands. So the Bahag says that to know God is not something which is a commandment, right? Even the idea of let's say switching a certain think of it as switching a certain switch, right? There are people who don't think it's obvious that God exists, right? But the point is that once you do come to the realization that God exists, the way we explain that is not that it's a distant notion that you have to learn in books. It is a very abstract thing, right? In which case what happens? You have to come to a conclusion one time that God exists, and then basically, like, you thought about it, right? I came to the conclusion that God existed one night in 1972, and then that was the end of the matter. That, the Bahag would say, is not a commandment. That's not the type of thing you're commanded to do. We're not commanded to change our worldview, so to speak. There's no such commandment. Commandments don't fall on that category. There's no changing your worldview or changing your perspective. These things are halachically irrelevant. When he says it's a mitzvah to think or not to think, he means in the moment, right? Like it's a mitzvah. You're not supposed to think about a davar erva. You're not supposed to think about nakedness or about inappropriate things, right? Or you're not supposed to think negatively about another person, right? That sort of thing. You can understand how that's a commandment. That's a commandment right now. The commandment is incumbent upon you constantly, right? There's no commandment, you shall have the right opinion about X. That's not the whole idea of having an opinion is not a halachically relevant
but this could be obvious as well.
Category. What?
Not to think of evil things or whatever.
Right. Well, not exactly. No. It depends. It's not a notion. You understand? It's not even a thing. It's not a thought. It's not a notion. It's not like the Pythagorean theorem or 2 + 2 = 4. Not thinking about bad things is to push away a certain desire, right? Or even to think about, right? So
at the very same level, you can think, well, God exists, but maybe for some moment you think, well, God doesn't exist.
Right. So this is going to be very good. So that's going to be the argument of all the other rabbis. The Bahag says it's just changing an opinion, it's switching a switch. That's not a halachic construct. That's not something which the Torah commands upon. The Torah only commands you on thought, speech, and action. It doesn't command you on opinion or perspective, right? And this is something which is so obvious, which a person can know constantly. It's not something that we need a command for. It's not like pushing negative thoughts out of your mind, which is a constant struggle a person has. This is an opinion matter, the Bahag would say. All the other rabbis, as we're going to read inside, say that what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is that you're not allowed to push it. You're not allowed to push it out of your mind. In other words, you have to actively work on thinking about this constantly. That's the opinion of the other rabbis who say it is a mitzvah to know Hashem, that it's not enough just to think about this once and have it as a set opinion, but rather you really have to get into the depth of this concept and think about it constantly. And they say it's a commandment that goes on machshava, that goes on thought. So it's a thought commandment, right? So it's really a disagreement about what the Torah means when it says you should know God, whether it's simply a matter of deciding once and having that as a part of your worldview, or whether it means that you are obliged to constantly think about it. And if it's the latter, then it's a mitzvah. If it's the previous, then it's simply a foundational Torah idea. It is not a commandment, right? Right.
Isn't that part of the commandment? Basically, an acceptance of the commandment.
It's a commandment of God's kingship. That's accepting upon yourself the yoke of the kingship of heaven. I'm not even sure if that's a mitzvah outside of actually saying the words of Shema. You'd be surprised how many things which we think are mitzvahs, which have to do with the heart and the mind, that the actual halachic compilers say are connected to actions, right? So you could say there's a mitzvah to accept God's yoke or God's kingship upon yourself. The actual mitzvah is to say the words Shema Yisrael with intention, right? There's no having the yoke on you is not a mitzvah. That's not in general, the idea of having a certain perspective or thinking in a certain way is generally speaking not a commandment of the Torah. The commandments are all attached to specific actions, and even the ones that aren't attached to very specific actions are attached to constant thinking, right? Or constant, right? Like the mitzvahs to love and fear God, which many opinions say are a commandment, right? Those are connected to prayer. And also throughout the day, you're supposed to also work on not forgetting these things, similar to knowledge of God, as we're going to explain.
The words, are those, to be counted, or the actual prayer, like you say shacharit. So say shacharit, is that a mitzvah or not?
Is praying a mitzvah?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
No, praying in general and in specific, sharit.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. There's opinions which say that prayer in general is not one of the 613 mitzvahs. There are other opinions which say it is one of the 613 mitzvahs, but then the question becomes, what's prayer? Right? And the oldest notion of prayer that people say is a biblical mitzvah is mevakesh tzrachav, that a person asks for what he needs. Right, not the actual nusach of the tefillah. The nusach of the tefillah is a means that was put together by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah and other great rabbis to try and achieve and accomplish the mitzvah of prayer. And with the descent of the generations, it was decided that spontaneous prayer and having your own words for prayer was not as salient an option, or was not as effective at connecting the person with God as it once was, because people were of a lower level and of less of a spiritual standing, and they needed a more structured process. Although you'll be interested to know that Chassidus' approach to prayer basically says that the structure is only the beginning, and the whole point is to work through the structure to reach a deep and profound soul connection with God. The structure is only the first step, but the fact remains that if you don't say the words, it's not generally speaking a mitzvah. Okay. So something which you feel, in other words, something which is absolutely apparent to you, to the point that it's within your world, as we've been explaining before, which is understanding of knowledge we've been talking about. Right? Once you feel it, and once you know it, and once it's part of your worldview, how can there be a commandment to either feel this thing or not feel this thing? It's a thing which is to you. That's what the knowledge of God is. The knowledge that God exists is a thing which is part of your world, right? It's part of your perspective, and you can't really have a commandment on this. This is the opinion of the Bahag. Because we see that the world lives and is sustained from the life of lives, as was explained in chapter 1. And that's why the Bahag doesn't count this as one of the mitzvahs, because you are constantly reminded of it. You can see it with your own eyes. It's a permanent part of your worldview, and we don't have mitzvahs on things like that. But the Rambam and his his posse, the opinions that follow that are like the Rambam, and Rabbeinu Yonah, whose opinions follow him, they all say that this is one of the 613 mitzvahs, to know God. Why? Because what's the commandment? The commandment is to deepen one's knowledge and to contemplate this thing that you already know. The mitzvah is not the knowledge itself. The mitzvah is to constantly think about, to deepen your knowledge, and not to and to contemplate this thing. And for this there can be a commandment. Because even if something is known to you already, even if you did decide one night in 1972 that you know that God exists, right, which is itself a laughable concept, because as we've been hinting to sort of and explaining, and as we're going to explain more, the knowledge that God exists, is that simple fact that God exists, is something which you can work to know your entire life, right? But let's say that were the case, right? If you don't contemplate it constantly and you move your mind to other things, this one decision that you made one time won't help you at all. Even if you think about this, even if you do think about it often, but only at a surface level, this also doesn't achieve anything. Rather, you have to think about this deeply. You can't just have it as a passing thought that God exists. You have to actually sit and contemplate this deeply. And that, as we explained before, that is the type of knowing when you think about it constantly and it becomes really part of your, that's what makes it really part of your world and lets it affect your middas, lets it affect your emotions. That's what allows you to have an emotional attachment to the Creator, because you constantly think about it in a deep way, not just thinking about it once or thinking about it at a surface level. This is what it says that you should know today, and you should take it to heart. Right. And so too the commandment on faith is on what it is impossible to know. As we said before, faith we already discussed the difference between in whether it's a mitzvah or not. Right? The Bahag again says that it's not a mitzvah, and he says not a mitzvah because you can't have the person commanding you cannot tell you on faith to believe that you exist. Right? So he says that faith is the idea that God exists, and therefore there's no room for it to be a mitzvah. And the Abarbanel commented that really the mitzvah of faith is not faith that he exists, but rather faith in what he is, right? That he is the most perfect of all existences, according to the Rambam, or in Sovev Kalam, in the higher levels of godliness which are not invested in the world, according to Kabbalah, right? But the point is that the commandment on faith is what you cannot know. So long story short, we divide into two general groups. We have the Bahag versus everyone else. The Bahag says neither knowledge nor faith is a mitzvah. The Bahag says that knowledge is not a mitzvah because it's simply something which changes in your perspective. It's not something which doesn't fall under the purview of a mitzvah. And he says that faith is not a mitzvah because it is a logical impossibility to be commanded to believe that the person who's commanding you exists. As we've explained all this in previous classes. And then that's the Bahag. And then you have everyone else, as we've been explaining, who says that both of them are a mitzvah. The mitzvah of knowledge is to think constantly about the fact that God exists and to deepen your knowledge. And that's the commandment. And the commandment of faith is that a person has to get in touch with this, with not just with the fact that God exists, but what God is, with God's perfection, whether that's according to the Rambam, which means he's the necessary existence, or it's according to Kabbalah, which has an even higher understanding, that the godliness which is not invested in the creation of the world, right? All of this should sound familiar because this is all summary of what we've done already, right? And this that the Rambam writes in his Sefer HaMitzvah, the Rambam, as we've mentioned before, has a bit of he argues on himself, right? Because in one of his Sfarim, the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he says the first mitzvah is to have faith in God. But in his Mishnah Torah, in his much longer work on Jewish law, he says that the mitzvah is to know, right? And he's sort of disagreeing with himself. One is a mitzvah which one is it? Which one is the first mitzvah? Is it to have faith or is it to know? So he, really, the Rambam holds that there's two things and it's one mitzvah. There's one mitzvah. It includes two things. It includes knowing what you can know, and having faith or connecting to with faith the what you can't know, which is the true nature of God, right? And he says this is one mitzvah. As opposed to Rabbeinu Yonah, who makes of this two mitzvahs, mitzvahs ha'emunah mepasuk anochi, the mitzvahs hadas mepasuk v'yedaita hayom, one from the first verse of the Ten Commandments, and the other from the verse of v'yedaita. Rabbeinu Yonah says knowledge and faith are two different mitzvahs. V'amar v'zalashone u'mailas hisbenu b'gdalasa yisbarek mashakasu v'yedaita. The level of the one who thinks about his greatness, as it's written v'yedaita. Okay, nimsru lanu mitzvahs haseh. And this was given to us as a positive commandment. Sorry, I'm just going fast because I want to finish, and we're just saying that Rabbeinu Yonah considers them two mitzvahs instead of one mitzvah. So really there's three opinions. There's the Bahag who says neither is a mitzvah. There's the Rambam that says they're both a mitzvah, but they're one mitzvah. And there's the Rabbeinu Yonah who says that and this that the Chinuch writes, to know and to believe that there is a God, means to say that what's for knowing you should know, and what's for believing, what's for having faith in you should have faith in. You, again, believing is a terrible word, but for the translation of what we're trying to talk about, but whatever. The Iu b'shitas Rambam Kazel, and Sefer HaChinuch goes after the opinion of the Rambam, and he considers them one mitzvah in the 613. Okay? Until here, that's the end of chapter 2. Until here, the whole chapter 2 was basically explaining the difference between faith and knowledge, and why it is that some people say knowledge is a mitzvah in God, and why there's opinions which say it isn't. Knowledge of God is a mitzvah, and a different opinion why it isn't a mitzvah. So really, chapter 1 introduced us to the notion of faith and what faith might mean, and that faith in God applies to godliness which is not invested in the world, which is going to be a running theme of ours. The second chapter basically dealt with knowledge. What is this other thing, knowledge, and what is the mitzvah to know God, right? Are there any questions before I do the synopsis, or should I do the synopsis first, and then we'll see?
How do you reconcile all these three different people?
Pardon?
By the Rambam, and that's how you go, instead of Rabbi Yonah or anything. So it's really one in his list of.
The halacha, I don't know. I don't know what the conclusion is of Jewish law, but the fact is that this is not the most important thing for us, because we know that we have faith and knowledge as in other words, whether or not it is a mitzvah is and always has been a relatively irrelevant question in Jewish law. Whether it is one of the 613 mitzvahs it may have some applications in some of the more obscure aspects of the law, like if you have two laws in conflict, so a law that's from the Torah will take precedence over a rabbinical decree or something else, right? But the generally speaking, the idea which of the 613, which one is and which one is not of the 613 is not relevant to our obligations, right? Which is always the bottom line. In Judaism, we are obliged to both have faith and to know God. Right, so whether it is one of the 613 or not is more, in a sense, more of an academic question.
Right, yeah, because you don't really count them mitzvot as you do them.
There's a reason why as we said in I think our first class on this mimer, there's a reason why it took till the Middle Ages for all these different rabbis to try and pinpoint which ones are the 613. Right, the Talmud says there's 613, but it doesn't say what they are. It doesn't list them. It just says that there are 613, which is why when you get to the Middle Ages and the Rishonim and the great geniuses like the Rambam and the Chinuch and all these people we're talking about, that's why there's like 12 different opinions on which of what the Torah says are the 613 that it's talking about in the Talmud, right? But the Jewish faith pre-existed the Middle Ages. In other words, the matter is more of an academic matter than in this mimer. It's more of a means to get us to a discussion and to understand the difference between faith and knowledge and what faith is, rather than the focus of the mimer, so to speak.
The Talmud was what? Evolved.
The Talmud was compiled, I believe would be the correct word, in about, I think, maybe 300 CE, something like that. Yeah, in Babylon. 2 Talmuds, and the Jerusalem Talmud was slightly earlier.
So the rabbis, the sages got together, and they said, and there was, and somehow 613.
Well, it's the way it works is we can't do a rundown of how the whole oral law works right now. But the bottom line is that there were much older texts, midrashim written by previous rabbis in the Mishnaic period, which was a few hundred years earlier. Similar. No. That are quoted in the Talmud, and that forms the basis. The Talmud is basically a recording of a later reconstruction, dissection, and discussion of everything that it said in all the Mishnaic texts, of which there are many. And you can actually go and buy the midrashim in their complete form nowadays. You can go and buy the midrashim were actual rabbinic commentaries on the Torah. They're the oldest verse by verse commentary on the Torah that there are. Something believed to be quite ancient. So this idea, everything in the Talmud either comes from the Mishnah or was basically passed down from teacher to student until the Talmud. And really the same story goes for the Mishnah, the story of whose compilation is very interesting, and it's a whole discussion. But the bottom line is that the Talmud was a compilation. The Talmud wasn't written. The Talmud wasn't authored. The Talmud was a recording. It's almost like the recording of minutes of discussions between great Babylonian sages trying to understand or trying to sort of retroactively dissect and recompile and understand the words of the Mishnaic sages, which themselves were passed on not just in the Mishnah but in many writings. Pardon? The Talmud is the Gemara. Yeah, sorry. Talmud and Gemara are more or less interchangeable. Yeah.
It's the.
Some people say that the Gemara. Some people say that the Gemara is the non-Mishnaic section. Some people like to make that distinction. But yeah, they're basically the same thing. Talmud and Gemara. And the Mishnah, the Talmud is made up of the Mishnah. It's a very fascinating topic in general. The Talmud is made up of the Mishnah, which is the earlier sources, and then the commentaries on the Mishnah. So, long story short, the idea comes from earlier and was debated and was sort of there. As far as I understand, there was basically a great rabbinic convocation, and everybody sent all of their stuff to Ravina and Rav Ashi, who lived in Babylon around the year 300, and they. Using a method that is very hard to decipher, they organized it, so to speak. So someone who's familiar with Talmud can sometimes struggle to figure out what the organizing principle is, but they organized it and they put it together into the Talmud in a canonical form around the year 300. So let's just do the synopsis of chapter 2 here. The Tzemach Tzedek raises the whole thing about 613 mitzvahs is based off a verse, by the way. Just, you should know, it's based on a midrash off a verse.
But are those listed any place?
Sorry?
The 600 things?
Sure, 12 different places, 12 different lists. The Rambam has one, Sefer HaMitzvah, so you could look at the beginning of Mishnah Torah, there's a list, and that's the most common one. Sorry?
How many of them, of the 613, are without the Beit HaMikdash?
Right, how many mitzvahs apply nowadays without the Beis HaMikdash? I forget the exact number. It's something like
third.
I think it's like 150, maybe even that few. I don't know exactly. I'm not sure if there's agreement on all of that either. There's things which we have nowadays, which is debatable whether we have them without the Beis HaMikdash, right? Okay, the Tzemach Tzedek raises a fundamental question. I'm reading the synopsis on page 56. Can God's existence be known? For the Zohar clearly states, no thought can grasp him at all. In resolution, it is explained that we can know only the existence of God, but not his essence, right? We can know that he is, but not what he is. Just as we can know that we possess a soul, but we cannot comprehend truly what it is, right? Comprehension here meaning a deep and intimate knowledge, knowing it as a part of your worldview, as having it be a part of your world, what it actually is. Both knowledge, das, and faith, emunah, play a role in our relationship with God. Faith connects us to those dimensions of godliness that transcend our understanding, while knowledge enables us to relate to those dimensions of godliness that we can comprehend. As a result, knowledge serves as the key to our emotions. Our knowledge of God spurs our love and fear of him. Faith, by contrast, inspires us in an encompassing manner, meaning we have faith, but it does not affect our emotions. It does not enter our worldview because it connects to an aspect of God which cannot, by definition, be real to us or be within our world. Right? That was the whole idea. Thus, it is possible for there be real to us in that way, in that intimate way. Let's put it that way. Thus, it is possible for there to be a contradiction between our faith and our understanding. On this basis, we can explain the conflicting views mentioned above regarding whether faith in God is a mitzvah. The opinion of the author of the Halachas Kedulos is that it cannot be counted as a mitzvah. His rationale is that a commandment necessitates that a person be presented with a choice. And according to him, since the knowledge of God's existence is grasped and produces feeling, there is no choice involved in believing in God. Rambam, it's interesting, the synopsis understands it slightly differently than I did. Okay, whatever. Rambam and those who follow this approach, however, do include the mitzvah of knowing God in the enumeration of the mitzvahs. Their rationale is that although knowledge of God's existence can be attained without much effort, the commandment mandates that we deepen our understanding by contemplating godliness. A second aspect of this mitzvah is to relate with emunah to those dimensions of godliness that cannot be grasped through knowledge. In sum, according to the Rambam, the first of his positive commandments includes A, deepening our knowledge, and B, faith in him. That's pretty much what we said before. Let's turn to page 61. We'll jump right into it. So we're going to now that we've explained faith and knowledge and the difference between faith and knowledge, we are now going to get into faith, which is really the main, that's what we're here for. That's what this mimer is about. That's what this discourse deals with directly, and we're going to get into faith. And in order to get into,
faith, seems to convey, at least to me, sort of an intrinsic connectedness.
Yes, that is basically what we're saying. To the extent that,
so to say you have faith, you're really
the English words are terrible.
To say you have faith, you're really saying I have within me
to say you have faith in the regular English understanding, to believe in something, is an output of the soul. Imagine the soul is a black box, right? We just said you can't know the soul, right? The soul is a black box. It has inputs and outputs, right? So you input knowledge, you input sensory experience, right? And outcomes out from the soul come thought, speech, action, right? Things like that. So emunah, faith, is an input of the soul. It's not to actively believe in something. When we say in the modern parlance, I believe in such and such a thing, belief is a conscious. When the modern understanding of belief is the conscious and intentional reworking or grasping of an idea or of a concept or of a deity or something like that. When we're saying faith here, we're saying faith like we're saying faith as an input. We're saying that the soul has the ability to grasp different things differently. There's fundamentally a break, right? There's two different things God made the world with. There's things which are to be grasped with the knowledge input of the soul, and there's things which are to be grasped with faith input of the soul. Namely, the godliness which is invested within the world is to be grasped by the knowledge input of the soul. The godliness which is not invested within the world, the godliness that is simple, the godliness which is infinite, is to be grasped by faith. Faith is an input. Faith is like a sense. It's like a sixth. You can see, you can hear, so you also have faith, right? This is why it says that every Jew has faith, right? It's not that every Jew believes in God in the modern understanding. That's obviously not true. When it says every Jew has faith, it means your soul is manufactured with a part of the soul whose job is to grasp the simplicity and the infinitude of the Creator, is to grasp these simple things which are beyond knowing. Right? Some would say that faith doesn't just grasp God. That's only its highest purpose, right? Some would argue, and this gets into epistemology, and I don't even want to go there, but some would argue that the very idea that the world exists, or that you exist, or that you're not living in a dream, or that there's even a person sitting across from you, is also something which the soul grasps on faith, right? It's debatable, right? How can you know? You don't know, right? You have faith. You have everybody knows this, but nobody can explain to you. I can't share with you. There is no divisible or analytical way I can explain to you why this is true. This is simply something that everyone knows. It's a simple knowledge that everyone knows, right? Things that are simple, things which are not analytical, things which can't be divided into pieces, things which you can't explain, which can't be shared, right? Because dividing the process of analysis is the same as putting into words. Putting into words is also dividing knowledge and sharing it in pieces, right? It's the same idea. All these things should hint to us that it's a faith thing. It's a thing which comes into the soul through the capacity of faith, right? The class I gave that we did outside of the text about faith and knowledge was all about this idea that faith and knowledge are simply two different parts of us that everybody has, that grasp, that are made to grasp two fundamentally different aspects of the creation. And that whole class got into why God created the world in two different ways, and there's two different aspects of the creation, and see that class.
Tzemach Tzedek basically talks about Emunah, but does he talk also about Bitachon?
I'm not sure if Bitachon is touched on in this moment.
The word Emunah in Hebrew, some of the root of the word is trust.
Yeah,
Is bitachon. Some of it is.
I'm not sure if it's going to. I'm not sure if we're going to touch on that. We are. Yes.
Knowledge. No, that. How do you define knowledge?
We have been defining knowledge at great length. The short version is that knowledge is knowledge is our capacity knowledge is our capacity to make real to ourselves and to attach to intimately things within the world that are limited. It's to know. We've been saying knowledge in this context is to know intimately, right? It's an intellectual experience which leads to emotion. And to know means it's knowledge is the way that the soul grasps things which are limited, things which are divisible and limited. Sorry?
Stuff you experience.
Yeah, but that doesn't get to the root of the issue. That's an effect, or that's a consequence of the root thing, which is that knowledge attaches itself to that which is limited, which is limited means divisible, analyzable, conveyable through words, right? All these things go together. Faith is the connection of the soul to that which is infinite, simple, and indivisible.
Is there any relation between the words emunah and amen?
Probably. I'm not familiar. Okay. We are starting chapter 3. But to begin our discussion of faith in earnest, we are going to be dealing with the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, which are very famous. The Rambam codified. Remember, the Rambam was in the Middle Ages, which again is very interesting. Knowing the history really helps understanding what's going on, because you have to realize that the Rambam's codification of this is what Judaism believes was completely radical. He was the first one to do it, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I think he was the first one to do it. And at the time, he was definitely the most famous one to do it. And it was very, very radical. Until the Rambam, there is no codification of what Jews believe whatsoever. Again, until the Rambam, there is no codification of what Jews believe at all.
So when did the Torah get reduced to writing? Put it that way.
No, the Torah has two parts. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. The written Torah was always written thousands of years before the Rambam.
So wouldn't that?
No, because the written Torah. Where does the written Torah tell you what to believe? It doesn't tell you what to believe. The written Torah has stories, right? Which the implication is these stories are true, granted, right? And when I say stories, I don't mean like false stories. I mean narrative. It's in the narrative form, right? I'm speaking literarily, right? There's narrative. There's telling you sipur, what we call in Hebrew sipur dvarim. This is what happened, right? Abraham went down to Egypt, right? And there's commandments, and the commandments are not the vast majority of them, maybe all of them, right? Depending who you ask. Nothing about what you believe. The Talmud and the Mishnah, which both predate the Rambam significantly, touch on these issues, dance around these issues, but there is no codification of this is what Jews believe. And when I say there's no codification, I mean when the Rambam says something that today most of us would think is absolutely non-controversial, right? God doesn't have arms, right? God cannot have a body, yeah? In the Rambam's times, this was argued upon by the greatest rabbis of the age. There are people who simply disagree. There There are people who simply disagree. Very famous, I think we may have even spoken about it before in this class, I cannot remember. The Rambam says God cannot have any arms, and the Raavad says there are people who are older and greater and wiser than the Rambam who say that God could have arms. Who is he? Who is the Rambam to come along and say God can have arms, right?
It's a very valid argument because it says, B'charon Apo, it does have some.
Sure. The Torah said that's why the Raavad said it, because the Torah says the Torah uses anthropomorphisms, right? The Rambam says those anthropomorphisms are largely metaphorical, right? The Raavad comes and says, "How dare you?" Right? And the Rambam says, right? This is fundamental to this is part of Jewish belief, and so too with many other concepts. And as we're going to see, even in the very beginning here of chapter 3, there are people who codified the principles of Jewish faith differently than the Rambam. They said things that the Rambam said were principles that everyone has to believe. They said were not principles, and things which the Rambam doesn't mention, they say are fundamental. Right?
But some of them think like Anochi Adonai Elohecha Asher Tzedek.
Yeah.
So how can you still say, no, God doesn't ask us to believe in him?
To say God doesn't exist is a point that you'd think most people could agree on, right? We're going to see. To say that there is a God, right? Because that's clearly part of the Torah, right? But things are not so simple. Things get a lot murkier from that. The Rambam has 13 principles, and not really not all of them are. None of them really are as simple as there is a God, right? It goes far beyond that. The idea. In fact, from what we've learned in this mimer so far, you should see that from the Jewish perspective in general, the simple idea that there is a God is not even considered to be a thing. Right. That's not even a religious thing. That's just the reality. That's like 2 + 2 = 4. You don't build a religion on 2 + 2 = 4. You don't say Judaism is different than Islam or Christianity, lahavdil, because we believe there is a God, right? Even the pagans really believe that there is a God. If you really get into it and you find the ones that actually bothered to think about it, right? This is before even we begin. The Rambam is saying, what is Judaism, right? What is Judaism in terms of belief, right? Orthodoxy, which I believe the word orthodoxy means right thinking, if I'm not mistaken. What does it mean? What does it mean what does a Jew think? What does a Jew believe? And I'm telling you that belief of what a Jew believes was not really fundamental to Judaism before the Rambam's time, as we see from the fact that nobody codified Jewish belief. And even at the Rambam's time, and since the Rambam is controversial, is not agreed on by everyone, and that's the way of it. That's the way of the Torah. So in other words, and a lot of people don't know this, even though we say that the basic principles, and if someone asks you what do Jews believe, you can definitely point to the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, a student at a deeper level needs to understand that Judaism in general is not a religion of solid beliefs. We believe in other words, you may say that God forbid to say that any of the 13 principles of faith are untrue. God forbid, unless you're a giant of a rabbi, like the ones that argued who were in a position to argue with the Rambam. God forbid to say that any of them are not true. However, Judaism is fundamentally a religion of action, ritual, people, land, and things like that. Belief is secondary in Judaism. It's not like there's a codified list, simple list of this is what we believe. The Rambam's list is maybe the closest that we get, but the Rambam's list is controversial, and not controversial, in a way of not controversial from people that want to scrap the whole Judaism and throw it away, right? That's a non-controversial controversy, right? That someone looking to start a new religion comes and says that what the Rambam says isn't true. That's not even interesting, right? Rabbis who are truly Jewish and as Jewish as the Rambam and as learned even as the Rambam and as steeped in what the Torah said came to radically different conclusions than what the Rambam says. And this is the way of the Torah. As we know, the Talmud is full of disagreements. The Mishnah is full of disagreements. Judaism is a religion that tolerates opposites. It tolerates differences in understanding and differences in belief. So I felt this is an important preface to our discussion of the Rambam's 13 principles, that we should know that the 13 principles, although very good guidelines, and God forbid any of us to say that any word of them are not. The idea that there is a codified list of simple beliefs that all Jews believe, and that this is the Torah, is simply not true. It is a matter of controversy, and even though we follow the Rambam, maybe you could say even like lahalacha, if these things were in Jewish law, they're matters of controversy. And Judaism can easily tolerates and handles all of these differences. So as we're going to see.
Like Moshe, or Moshe Rabbeinu.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of people at the time of the Holocaust, as they were going into the ovens, were reading part of the Rambam.
Absolutely. Yep, that's right. About the coming of Mashiach. Okay, Gimel, chapter 3, page 61. V'hinei. Ha'karim v'yesod shetzarich kol echad miYisrael lahamin v'leida ne'emana b'metzias Hashem yisbarich. The foundations and the main concepts that each and every Jew must believe and know with regards to the existence of Hashem. Again, interesting use of words, with regards to his metzias, in other words, with regards to that God exists, right, which seems to be a simple unified principle. It is not a simple unified principle. There's a whole list, right? With regards to what it means to believe and know that God exists, there's a whole list. The first 5 of the 13 ikrim of the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, Rambam Perek Yud Sanhedrin, that the Rambam famously lays out in the 10th chapter, in his commentary on the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. That's a Mishnah. The Rambam's commentary on the Mishnayos is where he lists his 13 principles at length. If we have time at a different lesson, or maybe if we want to, we can get the original text to that, because it's very interesting. The original text of the Rambam's 13 principles, because what most people know is the summary that was made for the Siddur for people to say every day. But the Rambam has a much longer and more involved explanation of each of his 13 principles. That's really the original source. So the first five are about God. The first 5 of the 13 principles of faith are about God directly. The four of which are an explanation of the first principle, which is the existence of God. So the first of the Rambam's principles is the existence of God, and then there's 4 more principles which expound on that. V'lechein, therefore, what that is? V'lechein, therefore, menam bala ikrim be'ikr echad. Therefore, we have a parenthetical statement. The Baal HaIkrim was a different philosopher rabbi who lived at the same time of the Rambam, a different Rishon. He included all of these in one fundamental principle. And said that the 4 following principles were merely sort of branches that branched off from the first one. As opposed to the Rambam, who said they were each their own principle, right? So the Ikrim has a different list. The Ikrim says that what the Rambam considers separate principles 2 through 5, he only considers one principle. And the Rambam has his reasons for separating them into different principles. Nevertheless, he called the first principle the foundation of foundations, because this is the main point of the main points. The first principle is the main point of the 5, which talk about God. The Barbanel comments there. Okay, let's do footnote 1. In sections 1 and 2, the Tzemach Tzedek explained the mitzvah of faith involves not merely believing and knowing that God exists, but appreciating His transcendence and relating to Him on that level. Right? That's the faith part. The faith part is appreciating God's transcendence and relating to Him even beyond understanding. In this section, he initiates a logical process of intellectual development that makes that possible by defining the principles of faith, and in that way deepening our understanding of God's existence. In other words, if you're confused as to why suddenly we're grouping faith and knowledge when we just spent 2 chapters trying to separate them and categorize them, the reason why is because the Tzemach Tzedek is now going back to the beginning, and he's working up from first principles. Let's take what the Rambam says you have to believe, and we'll see through the process that this really means 2 things, that there's what you have to know, and there's what you have to believe. So in other words, we're now that we've defined them, so to speak, from the outside, we're going through this in a more on the topic, right? On topic, where the Rambam actually talks about what you have to believe, that Tzemach Tzedek is going to make this division for us again, right, as we go on. So don't stress about how, is this faith, is this knowledge, we're going to get to all that, okay? V'shar hashmana ikrim, so that's 5. 5 of them are about God. You have the main one, which is the first one, the first of the 13 principles, which is to believe that God exists. You have the next 4, which are branches off of that. Shar hashmana ikrim, the other 8 principles, which each and every person each and every Jew needs to know, are about Torah coming from God, coming from heaven, and schar v'enesh, and reward and punishment. So there's 3 categories. The 13 principles fall into 3 categories. There's the first 5, which talk about God. The remaining 8 talk about Torah and about reward and punishment. These are the 3 categories of what Jews believe according to the Rambam, and they're divided into 13 principles. The Chamisha Elu, we're almost out of time, so let's get to a good point to stop. We're not going to leave you on tenterhooks. What are the principles, right? Chamisha Elu, these 5 principles, the 5 principles of the Rambam's 13 that pertain to God are Echad, Shehu Yisbarech Mechuyav HaMetzias, that He may be blessed is the most perfect existence, or the necessary existence. That number 1 is that God is a necessary existence. He is not something He is not like everything else which might exist. He is that which has to exist. That is what God is, and that's sort of the definition of God, in a way, right? God exists, and He exists because He must exist, right? Not because He could exist, unlike everything else. Maybe we'll get more into that at a time. The Hainush Mitzvosech Me'atzmuseh, which is another way of saying that His existence is from Himself. He is of Himself. He exists on His own accord. Everything else requires another power to create them or to make them exist. God does not require another power. He is not the result of a prior cause, God forbid, right? That's the whole idea of God, that God is the first cause. There is no prior cause to God. That's what, so to speak, makes Him God. That's the definition of God. That there is a first cause of the universe who is not caused by anything else, and everything else is caused by Him, right? That is the first of the Rambam's principles. Beis, Shehu Yisbarech Echad HaEmes, that He is true oneness. The second principle is that God is true oneness, true unity. Gimel, the third principle, She'enei guf v'lo kayach b'guf, that He has no body and no kayach b'guf, and that He has no, he translated it as bodily power. That's an interesting way of translating it. In other words, not only does He not literally have a body, but He has no, No. He has no body, and He has no potential for a body. Let's call it. I think that's the best way of putting it. Maybe
That's exactly what
He has no potential. He has no body, and He has no potential for a body. It's not just that He technically doesn't have a body. It's that He has nothing to invest in a body, so to speak. That a body and Him are completely and utterly opposite one from the other. These two things can't go to. The notion that God should have a body is preposterous, basically. That He has, not just that He doesn't have a body, but He has no potential for having a body whatsoever. That's the third principle.
Adam was created with someone.
Yeah, it's a good question. We'll get to that, I'm sure. Dalid, she'en lo, and everything else in the Torah it says about God's body also. That's not even the main thing. How about God had an outstretched arm to take the Jews from Egypt? We've spoken about this before, but Dalid, the fourth principle is she'en lo hatulus bezman. He is not dependent upon time, right? Body, in a sense, is space, right? He has no body. You'd have to define what a body is, right? If body's in one of the principles, the definition of body must be important, and we assume it means one thing, but it's not necessarily so simple. Body covers more than we think it does, right? Body is almost basically covers the idea that He doesn't exist in space. The fourth principle is that He doesn't exist in time. God is not affected by time. He's not dependent on time at all. Hey, and the fifth principle, the fifth and final principle, which speaks about God, at least directly, that He has an ability. He has abilities. We call it an ability because to call it a yecheles, because to call it a koyach is incorrect, right? Koyach is like koyach leguf. We don't say koyach. We don't say God has potential. We say He has abilities. Bilti bal tachlis, that have no end. In other words, God is infinitely powerful. Fifth is God's omnipotence. He has infinite power. V'shepel beratzen, I assume this is a continuation of the fifth principle, I'm not 100% sure, that he acts willfully, he acts by will, which is very important if you read the Mor Nevuchim, if you read the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed, the Rambam talks about this a lot, that God acts willfully, he acts by desire. In other words, he is not coerced either by necessity or by nature. His decisions are willful, he decides what to do. And controls the world himself, and therefore he is the one who deserves to be worshipped or served. See there at the beginning of see Rosh Hashanah chapter 7. Let's see. Okay, let's go a little bit further and just finish at the right spot. Sorry, we're going to go a minute over. Included in the fifth principle, right, which is the principle of his omnipotence, is what the Bala Ikrim mentions. That God is removed from lack, or the correct philosophical term that no one has any idea would have any idea what it means. He doesn't have any paucity. I think that's how you pronounce it. Paucity. He has no paucities. God has no lacks. God lacks nothing. He's removed from lacking. Which is included in the idea that he is omnipotent, and it's included in that same idea. Really, as we said before, all of these ideas are inter-included, right? The Ikrim says they're so inter-included that you only really need one. You have God as a necessary existence, and everything else follows automatically, basically, according to the Ikrim. The Rambam says there are 5 separate principles. Okay, but included in the idea that he's of infinite power is that he lacks nothing. Shu hashlemus ha'amiti, in other words, he is the true perfection. And since he is true perfection, he therefore automatically is removed from having any lack or from lacking anything. God lacks nothing. And that's included in the fifth principle. So, we have five principles. The first 5 principles of faith talk about God. The first one says that he's a necessary existence. The second one says that he's one. The third one says that he doesn't have a body or a potential for a body. The fourth one says that he is not dependent on time. And the fifth one says that he is omnipotent and lacks nothing and rules the world through will, I guess, is all sort of connected to number 5. And next week we are going to continue and get into what all of these things, or at least some of these things, mean. Go ahead.
When was Rabbi Yehuda Levi?
Like around the Rambam, so maybe a little later than the Rambam, Middle Ages. He was a Rishon.
No, because he